The chairman rapped loudly for order. Gradually, the catcalls and boos died away as several self appointed sergeants at arms persuaded a few hot headed individuals to sit down. The speaker on the rostrum, by the chairman, seemed unaware of the disturbance. His bland, faintly insolent face was impassive. The chairman turned to the speaker and addressed him, in a voice in which anger and annoyance were barely restrained. Dr. Pinero. The doctor was faintly stressed. I must apologize to you for the unseemly outburst during your remarks. I am surprised that my colleagues should so far forget the dignity proper to men of science as to interrupt a speaker, no matter. He paused and set his mouth. No matter how great the provocation. Pinero smiled in his face, a smile that was in some ways an open insult. The chairman visibly controlled his temper and continued. I am anxious that the program be concluded decently and in order. I want you to finish your remarks. Nevertheless, I must ask you to refrain from affronting our intelligence with ideas that any educated man knows to be fallacious. Please confine yourself to your discovery, if you have made one. Pinero spread his fat white hands, palms down. How can I possibly put a new idea into your heads if I do not first remove your delusions? Thus begins Robert A. Heinlein's Lifeline, which is his first published short story. Welcome back to the Lore and Valor podcast. I am your host, Justin Watson, and Robert A. Heinlein is my favorite author and has been for many, many moons. Most fellow Heinlein fans probably know the story behind the story of Lifeline. Robert A. Heinlein was an Annapolis graduate, served in the Navy for a few years, and then was medically discharged due to tuberculosis. He went through a phase where he tried out silver mining, politics, I think real estate at one point, but none of them really sunk in. He kind of drifted from work to work for many years following the Navy. Then one fateful day in 1939, he saw an ad for a short story contest in Thrilling Wonder Stories. The grand prize was $50, which in 1939, sorry, was quite a tidy sum. So he set his mind to it. He sat down at his typewriter and wrote Lifeline, which appears in the front of the first lead story of The Pass Through Tomorrow, probably his most famous short fiction anthology. When he finished the short story, rather than submitting it to the short story contest, he decided it was too good for Thrilling Wonder Stories and instead sent it to the preeminent editor of short science fiction of the day, John W. Campbell, at Astounding magazine. I don't find that terribly surprising. Graduates of Annapolis, the Air Force Academy, West Point, have many distinct personalities and they are individuals, but there's a good chance if you're a graduate of Academy, deep down inside, you think of yourself as an outlier. And Robert A. Heinlein certainly was that. He had every right to think of himself as such. Campbell accepted the short story, and from that point forward, except for a brief stint at Philadelphia Naval Air Station, uh, experimental air station during World War II, Heinlein never did anything else for a living. He was a writer from 1939 until his death in the 80s. So his confidence was well deserved. The Pass Through Tomorrow holds a special place in my heart because this is the first Heinlein book I actually read all the way on my own. When I was a kid, my dad read Citizen of the Galaxy, Starship Troopers, Space Cadet, Red Planet, Have Space Equal Travel, all the Heinlein juveniles to me, plus The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which is not a book for kids, but my parents were definitely reluctant to shelter me, especially from ideas, no matter what my age. As soon as I could understand the English behind it, I could read the book. So, again, all those juveniles plus The Moon is a Harsh Mistress were kind of received knowledge to me. My dad read them to me, but The Pass Through Tomorrow as a short story anthology was actually the first one I picked up and started reading on my own. And I still love it to death. But what really captured me was actually 2 pages in the middle of the book, and they looked like this. So you're looking at the Heinlein timeline, and you can see he has the characters he's writing in his various stories, the uh, the technical advancements and when he thought they would happen, various data stories, and then the sociological implications of the future and his remarks on that in the far right, and obviously the stories and where they take place in this timeline as well. And I found this so fascinating. The idea that these stories were not standalone, nor were they even in a series, but that Heinlein had written them with a fully integrated vision of what the future of this fictional universe would look like. He was hardly the first person to do something this advanced. Obviously, in fantasy, you have Tolkien, who created a language and then wrote novels to justify it. But at the age of, I think I was 9 years old when I read this, it just captured my imagination so much to think of the epic sweep of Heinlein's future history. So I was hooked from then on out. The first few writing projects I did as a teenager, I have several copies of documents just like this in this exact format, where I lay out story ideas and fictional characters, and how the technology of my universe advances on what timeline. I have Honestly, I have far more documents like that from my youth and early adulthood than I do actual short stories or any kind of fiction to show for it. So I probably got lost a little too bit in the weeds, but needless to say, it really captured my imagination. And the stories themselves hold up very well as well, I think. You do have to take them as artifacts of their time, though. I will say Lifeline, especially, is a classic idea story. It's very emblematic of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, where science fiction authors in a short story would posit an idea, a technical development, a new technology, a sociological advancement, some change in the way we operate, either technically or sociologically. And then they would try to showcase the effects of that change through their characters. How well each of these golden age science fiction authors do their character work to support those idea stories is a matter for debate. I personally like Heinlein's characters the best. I appreciate Heinlein's Mark Twainsian sense of character work and humor that shows up in his stories, and in his novels especially. The central idea behind Lifeline is, if you think of time as yet another dimension, right? So if you think height, width, depth, and then time is the fourth dimension that we can measure to some degree, but we have trouble affecting our movement along the time axis. We can affect it somewhat by accelerating or decelerating our physical movement. And my smarter friends with a better grasp of physics are welcome to come at me in the comments and explain that I'm glossing over this and perhaps making mistakes in my explanation of this idea. Please do. I appreciate the engagement. But the idea being that if you can measure all four axes of the universe, height, width, depth, and time, it stands to reason that if you can measure a human in height, width, and depth, if you could develop the proper instrumentation, you should be able to measure him or her in time as well. So the main character of the story, Dr. Pinero in Lifeline, has developed that technology. And then Heinlein, in the next 15 or so pages of the short story, examines through um, Pinero's life and through some vignettes the sociological effects of people being able to know when they will cease to exist. And it's very interesting. It's one of the darker stories Heinlein has written. He's usually a fairly upbeat guy when you read his books, if very odd in places, but that's a subject for another video. But it is an interesting classic idea story, and I do recommend it. I think I am going to, over the course of the next few weeks, try to knock out a short story from this per week. I put up a poll for which set of books I should address next in our Facebook group, which I'll put a link to the Facebook group below if you want to come join us and chat about the channel and what content you'd like to see, or what you think about the content we've done so far. I'd appreciate it if you did so. And I will get to the winners of that poll. A lot of folks wanted to see Hammer Slammers next, the classic military sci-fi stories from David Drake. The Dragonlance series and the Heinlein Juveniles were also big winners, as were the Brotherhood of War, the military history, or I should say, um, um, they're not really military thrillers. Yeah, I guess they're military history novels would be a good terminology for them. The Brotherhood of War novels by W.B. Griffin had a lot of support as well, and I will get to all those, but that content actually takes a little bit more time, a little bit more research to do. So it'll be a minute for me to get those organized. Oh, and I also did promise my friend and former comrade Nick Jones, who I served with in Fort Carson, that I would finally read the Dark Tower series and do some review content on that as well. And that is underway. I'm reading the second book right now, so I'll let you know when that's ready as well. So let me know if you have read the Past Through Tomorrow. What was your favorite short story in here? In the comments below. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like, subscribe, check us out on your favorite podcast venue if you prefer to listen. And as always, we'd appreciate a comment below, both for just to start the conversation, and it helps with the algorithm. That's all the time I have for the Lore and Valor podcast. I hope to see you next time, and until then, keep up the fire.